My name is Prenta. I lived in Hamtramck, a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, in a two-story flat on Grayling Street. The apartment itself has a long and bloodied history of violence and death. Not only did I experience multiple ghostly apparitions, such as a man in a long beard that resembled Abraham Lincoln, but demonic possession, as well as poltergeist activity. The demonic possession was incredibly startling. It wasn't something that occurred inexplicably. I had a boyfriend who was connected to negative energies, and an evil spirit named Harold latched onto him. My boyfriend had never been once an aggressive or temperamental person. However, after staying together in that apartment for a lengthy period of time, our relationship began to sour. He would often talk in his sleep, which was something he had never done in the 7 years previous, and we had lived together for a long time. One night, he was sleeping right next to me. For some reason, I remember I had a difficult time trying to rest, so I was tossing and turning in bed. My boyfriend was dead asleep. Not a second later, he starts whispering. He keeps repeating, "Harold's here. Harold wants to play." Although it scared me half to death, what he said after that truly shook me to my core. He uttered some unnerving words, something about how he was going to take care of my suffering soul. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore, and I woke my boyfriend up. He was in a pure state of delirium. I told him he was talking in his sleep, and when I told him what he said, he looked at me as if he were terrified. That's because he said he had a dream about a man named Harold. My boyfriend told me that in his dream, he was in the mafia, and Harold was his mob boss. He wore a pure white suit and looked like a traditional mobster from the 1920s. Well, a couple days later, I was cleaning my apartment when I discovered a secret room that I never noticed before. It was basically a walk-in closet. The room was empty except for a small cabinet with a drawer. I opened the drawer, and in it was an old newspaper from the 1930s. I kid you not. In this newspaper was an obituary about a man named Harold. The obituary didn't say he was part of the mafia, but he was a World War I veteran. I believe that Harold used to live in this apartment. My boyfriend told me that Harold appeared once while he was in the shower, and I was away at work. I often worked a night shift at a hospital, so I'm often away at night. He heard a crash coming from the kitchen that startled him. When he went to investigate, the dishes that were on the countertop somehow fell to the floor. He then returned to the bathroom to brush his teeth, when he saw the face of a young man staring back at him in the mirror for a second, right behind him. It was so quick, but long enough to notice. He then had an idea to photograph the bathroom, a picture directly facing the mirror, and then the bathroom itself while standing from the doorframe. What he saw was incredible. It was an orb, clear as day, appearing right in the mirror. Either way, I was convinced that later on, my boyfriend was possessed by Harold. He became a shell of his former, laid-back and friendly self. He transformed into a vicious, aggressive, and easily agitated person. We eventually had to have a priest come over to bless the apartment and to perform a prayer on my boyfriend to release the spirit who could be inside of him. After we moved out of the house, the feeling of intense rage and negative energy seemed to subside almost entirely. He stopped talking in his sleep. He was more easygoing, and he started to become the man I fell in love with years ago. Still, there was one experience that I had while in that apartment that I'll never forget, as long as I live. It was the evening, and I was starting to settle down on my first night off from the hospital in days. I walked to my bedroom to change. In the bedroom, there is this huge mirror that I often use. As I was walking through the bedroom, I was looking at myself in the mirror. That's when I saw a woman dressed all in black with a scarf. It must have been some kind of babushka woman. I instantly closed my eyes out of pure fright, and as I opened them back up again, I returned to look back at the mirror, only to see that this woman had disappeared. I only saw myself. All of these events are 100% true. I know sometimes when people tell these types of stories, they are often met with a high degree of skepticism. I should mention, though, that I have high integrity, and I think it is foolish to tell pointless lies just for attention or to have a good story. The possession, Harold, the poltergeist activity, and the babushka woman were all signs that something awful wouldn't leave that apartment. At this point, I'm just thankful that I don't have to experience that ever again, and that my boyfriend isn't being used as a vehicle for paranormal entities. I would say this is a story of a haunted house, but it isn't. Until about 10 years ago, it was just a haunted house in my book. I met my husband over 30 years ago. He told me about a house that he used to live in that had some very strange things happening in it. It was local, but he never wanted to go anywhere near it. He said that it was very old and had been built by a young person who had some of the wood and granite that made the fireplace sent from Ireland. Anyway, the story is that when he married his wife, she came with her mother, a real shrew. She harped at him and distressed his wife to the point where he went mad and killed them both, then ran screaming that the demons of the house had made him do it. My husband's family moved into the house in the early 60s. During the years they lived there, they heard doors closing and footsteps on the stairs, as well as the smell of coffee and frying bacon in the middle of the night. His mother was quite a gardener, but could never get flowers to grow in the yard. He said the whole family was quite uncomfortable in the home and eventually moved. We had been together for a few years when we heard that the property had been sold for a mini storage lot. We were talking about it with my sister and some friends when my husband told the story. The friends asked to see the house. I'd never seen it to this point, and I'll admit, was more than a little bit curious. We finally talked him into going, and away we went. When we turned onto the street, we got a really creepy feeling, but when we pulled up to the house, I was absolutely terrified. There was not a living blade of grass or anything else on that lot. We live in Washington State, and this was March. The house was dark and very ominous. I refused to get out of the car. So did my sister. The guys, 3 of them including my husband, took a flashlight and headed around to the back of the house to see what they could see. After a few minutes, we saw a flash of light on the second floor. A few minutes later, we saw the front door open, but nobody came out. After a few minutes more, they returned to the car. We commented on the fact that we had seen the light, and they told us that they had never turned it on. Then we asked them why they didn't come out the front door. They told us it was locked, and that they tried it before going around back. I was always skeptical about the stories connected with the house, but after they tore the house down, the mini storage was plagued by problems and eventually went out of business. The property sits abandoned and barren. Still nothing lives there, and it's still as creepy as it was years ago. I've got a story to add to your website. I've gone back and forth about someone having come check it out. Just not sure I'm ready for it. But here goes my story. My husband and I moved into a new house built on a minor Civil War battlefield. We know there was another house in the vicinity. There was also a tree that was referred to as the hanging tree, not far from our backyard, on which about Union soldiers were hung. Soon after moving in, we noticed odd shadows and white lights that seemed to move across rooms with no apparent source. We tried to account for them by cars passing on the road, but never could pinpoint anything. One evening, we were watching TV when a shape ran past a door to what eventually would be our deck. The door was a good 4 feet off the ground, but the person running past ran level with the door itself. My husband and I ran for the door, flung it open, and my husband jumped down and ran in the same direction. At that time, we were the only house on that end of the street, and, being a very small town, it's very quiet at night, and sounds carry for quite a distance. We didn't hear anyone running, nor did we see anyone. We were spooked, but figured it was a kid, and our eyes played tricks on us. Not long after that, my husband jumped off the couch and ran for the door again because he said someone was standing there looking in. Again, level with the door and no deck. There was no one we could see when we went outside. Some months later, I was up around midnight cleaning the kitchen. My husband had gone to bed and shut the bedroom door. The bedroom was at the top of the steps and the door in plain sight. I was watching TV across the great room when I saw out of the corner of my eye a man leaning around the corner of the hallway wall and smiling at me. As I turned my head, I was ready to yell at my husband for sneaking up on me when I realized the man's hair was long and blondish, and my husband's is dark brown and short. I also realized the man was wearing a white t-shirt with full sleeves, nothing my husband owned. I couldn't see anything from the waist down. While I stood there staring, he simply vanished. I immediately ran to the hall and noticed the bedroom door was still shut, and if anyone had gone out the front door, I would have heard it. There was nothing, no sign of anyone. When my husband got up for work, I told him what happened. He said it was my imagination. I didn't think so, but we left it at that. However, I started turning on the lights when he left the house for work, since he left at 3 a.m. A few weeks later, though, my husband was in the front room at the computer. To the left is a table with an antique mirror hanging over it. My husband saw movement in the mirror and turned thinking it was one of our cats on the table. Instead, he saw a man's shoulder and arm, wearing a white shirt, walk past in the mirror. My husband simply got up and walked outside until I got home. During this time, my son, who knows no fear, would never stay downstairs at night by himself. He said he was creeped out, like someone was watching him from outside the door. My daughter, a typical teenager at the time who kept to her room, would often come downstairs to hug me and sit close to me. When I'd ask her if something was wrong, she told me that sometimes she felt someone was sitting on her bed, and that she saw things move out of the corner of her eye. The strange thing is that my husband and I never told the kids what we saw until they were 18 and 19. There was a time when activity seemed to stop after my husband, getting the idea from my friends, stood in the center of the house and asked whoever was there to not show themselves to him. He was left alone after that. However, recently, we've been experiencing marital problems, and my husband moved into another bedroom. I'm now hearing footsteps in my room, and I'm constantly woken up by what feels like someone sitting on my bed. I'll roll over, but there won't be anyone there. One night was unusually bad, and I had to get up earlier than normal the next day for a class. Around 10 p.m., I said out loud that I needed to sleep, and he wasn't letting me. If you wanted to bother someone, to please go harass my husband. Strangely enough, it got quiet, and I fell asleep, only to be woken at 11 p.m. by my husband, who was in the bathroom, frantically looking for someone to stop an area on his leg from hurting. He has psoriasis, but this particular time, he said it felt like someone was poking him with needles. The area was deep red and gave off heat. A very odd coincidence to say the least. We've also had things go missing: a tablecloth, a 15th century style costume, and various little things that turn up in different areas. We have yet to track down the tablecloth or the costume. I did tell the ghost not to hurt my husband. My uncle and aunt now live in a house near the bank in Auburntown. When I was a little girl, my best friend Steven and his family lived there. They bought the house and were told that the previous owner, an elderly lady, still haunted the house. They put little faith in the story and never let it bother them. I remember playing in Steven's room and smelling an old lady smell, like medicine and lilac perfume. We never felt threatened by a presence at all. The smell would usually fade away just as quickly as we smelled it. However, one night, after the family had gone to bed, Steven's mother was awakened by the sound of toys making noise in Steven's room. Steven had one problem: he was highly susceptible to nosebleeds. The slightest bump would set off a massive flow of blood. Steven's mother thought it was strange that he was awake and playing with so many noisy toys at once in the middle of the night. Also, the rocking chair in his room, where she would often read him bedtime stories, was rocking so hard that it was banging against the wall. She ran down the hall to his room, and when she opened the door, the toys went silent. The rocking chair slowed down. She looked at Steven in his bed and saw that his nose was bleeding very badly, and it was going down his throat. He might have drowned in his own blood if the very sweet lady's ghost had not raised such a racket that night. My grandmother Emily was a hard-working wife and mother, and during the Great Depression, she held her family together even when her husband, Grandma William, died suddenly. He left her widowed with several children to raise. She was a down-to-earth person and a practicing Catholic, so was not given to superstitions, but nevertheless had some encounters with the otherworldly. One time, for example, she was on her way to visit one of her brothers, an elevator repairman. On the way there, getting off the train, she had a sudden premonition of his death. She got a hold of herself and rushed to where she was supposed to meet him. It didn't take long for her to arrive at his workplace, an elevator station, where he had to do a repair job. She saw a noisy crowd assembled there, and she inquired what was happening. She was told that a repairman had been killed in an accident. It was her brother, the very one whom she had gone to meet, and about whom she recently had a deathly premonition about. I explained this as a prelude to her ghost story. Among her other siblings, she had a brother who was a decent man and a barber by profession. Unfortunately, they had a disagreement. which escalated into a parting of ways. He uncharitably held a grudge against her all the while. Time passed, and one night, while she was asleep and her husband were asleep in bed, she was suddenly awakened out of a sound sleep and noticed a person kneeling near the side of the bed. It was her estranged brother, garbed in his brother's smock and weeping bitterly. He was apparently suffering. She was startled and confused and didn't know how he got in her house and bedroom in the middle of the night and why he suddenly showed up after choosing to cut himself off because of a silly grudge against her. She began to speak to him and ask him what was wrong, but he interrupted his sobs to say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me." And with that, he completely vanished. She was amazed and woke up her husband, relaying to him what had just occurred. As they lay there discussing it, the telephone rang. Her husband answered, and it was for her. When she got on the phone, she was informed that sadly, there had been a death in the family that very night. It was her estranged brother, the barber. They understood this ethereal visit from beyond the grave to be the soul of the departed brother, and that he was given the grace to appear from his purgatory to his sister in order to make up for his uncharitable bearing of a grudge. A requiem mass was offered for him, and they prayed for his soul. He never appeared again. Hey Phantom, so it's day 5, and I have yet another new video for you guys to listen to. This time, some really cool stories that I think you all will enjoy. Or did enjoy, for that matter. Second of all, I'd like to give a big thanks to Tim, who actually sent me in one of his stories, and it was the last one that I read in this video. So guys, please take a moment to share this video. I really appreciate your subscribership, your viewership, whatever you want to call it, and let's say goodnight. Hopefully I can keep this up as long as we can. October's a great month, and I love you all, and I don't really have anything to say, so bye. Love you.